So where do we learn how to be an authority? Who are the first authorities in our lives? Parents. What did we learn? How many of you had parents who ever got angry at you? Keep your hands up. How many of you had parents who let you get angry at them? Ooh, not so many. A few. So those of us whose parents had this difference of opinion about what they could do and what we could do, when you argued with them, did anyone ever have your parents say, don't talk back? You know, I was very confused with that. I didn't know when I was saying something and then they started arguing, why wasn't that talking back? I tried to point that out once, but my dad just told me not to talk back. So what did we learn? How open were they to a disagreement? Not very. See, we didn't just learn that about our parents. We learned that about men and women. We learned that about husbands and wives. We learned that about authorities. So when an authority says, my door is always open, what do you think happens in most people's minds when they hear that? Not really. Yeah, right. We don't feel safe with most authorities. And that's partly because hardly anybody gets trained to be an authority. So we just pick up what we learned, and people tend to either be like their parents or the opposite of their parents. And so the greatest challenge we have is how to balance being an authority and being able to collaborate. That's the greatest leadership challenge. And that happens in all kinds of organizations. It happens in student organizations. It happens in government. It happens in professional associations and corporations. Everywhere where there's leadership, there are challenges that leaders have in how to balance this. And most of them, I think, are a little naive. I think when they say my door is open, 80% sincerely believe it. I think 20% don't mean it at all. But I think the 80% who do are shocked when people don't trust them. And what they're also unaware of is little ways in which they sabotage it. So I was participating in a group and had been coaching with the leaders, and he learned about collaboration. He should ask people their opinions. And so he asked a younger guy on the team, John, what do you think about this? And John was a little taken back, and he was stuttering a little bit, and about halfway through what he was saying, the boss went, well, that's stupid. Why do you think that? Yeah. What are the chances John's going to speak up again? So we all have these challenges, both in being an employee and being a leader, that we need to learn something about, and that's what I want to give you some insights about, because mostly leaders do it one of two ways, and both of these are fails. They either do it too much authoritating, which is, my way or the highway. I had a person I was coaching who had been told, his boss had been told, that his employees felt like he wasn't interested in their concerns. So the boss is very interested in collaboration, and he told this manager, I need you to have team meetings so you can hear these concerns. And his response was, why? I don't care what they think. They're there to do what I tell them. Now, because this manager had a boss who was very interested in collaboration, and he was unwilling to learn why that might be valuable, he didn't stay in that job. And more, that's happening in corporations. Hostile work environment can be a problem. But at the same time, on the other side is, one big happy family. When I was in college, I was in a service organization. I was given a project to do, and I was on this side. I wanted everybody to be happy, and I figured if everybody got to say what they thought, and I didn't really think it this way, but really it was everybody got a vote. But no more than that, everybody got a veto. And what that did is it ended up with me not getting an agreement in the group and kind of stymied the project until the president of the organization came in and rescued me and basically said, Rob, we need to get this done. And he gave me a great insight. He said, you want to be a leader people want to follow, but you also don't want to be a leader who can produce results. There's a lady, Liam Brannon, who wrote a book called The 7 Reasons Employees Leave. Interesting statistic, 89% of managers she found believe that people leave because of money or salary. The real reason is in a moment, but the percentage of why people leave for money or salary is 12%. That says a lot about Supervisors not knowing their employees. The real percentage is 79% leave primarily because they don't feel appreciated. Now, there's a truth about human beings. We will tolerate a disagreement when we experience being understood. We won't tolerate not being understood. Leaders need to know that they can have authority and at the same time facilitate collaboration. And that's not an easy thing for people to know. So I want to give you 3 keys. One is how to use authority. And I have the Bookends of Authority for that. But also how to turn conflict into agreement. It's much easier than you think. And the third is actually how to raise a conflict up to an authority. We think of that as tattling, telling on somebody. But there's a time when we need to do that, and I want to show you when. So the bookends of leadership, there are 2 times to use authority. The first time is when the decision is made. Either you made it or someone else made it. Don't hide that if you've made the decision. And when you do that, you want to follow what's called the 30 management principles of the U.S. Marines. And one of them is decide and invite dissent. So the decision's been made, I made it or my boss or someone else made it. We're going to do this. Let's talk about the problems. Let's talk about the challenges. Let's talk about the risks. That's a very key word, risk. If you're leading and you want people to participate, don't just say, what do you think? The authority is too big in the room. Say, what are the risks of this direction? We're still going to do it. What are the risks? Now you start to bring out everybody's concerns and issues. And again, people will tolerate a disagreement when they experience being understood. They won't tolerate not being understood. On the other side is when you facilitated a discussion and you ideally come up with an agreement. I think mainly that's what leaders should do, is facilitate discussions to get agreement. But that's not always possible. Not everyone is going to agree. So there's a time when the authority has to make the decision. There's also a time when everyone wants to do what the authority is not willing to take the risk to do. And in those moments, you exercise your authority by doing 2 things. These are critical. The first one is you have to create in the people on your team an experience of being understood. That's different than you understanding. And that only happens by you basically repeating what they're saying to their satisfaction, for them to tell you you understand. And then acknowledge the risk you're taking by not following their advice. Make sure the experience is being understood and acknowledge the risk you're taking by not following their advice. See, most people just don't know this little thing, so they're very uncomfortable about being an authority, and they're very uncomfortable when people kind of forcing them to take action. But with this, I find it much easier and more enjoyable and easier to do. So the bookends are at the beginning or end. In the middle is this whole huge process called collaboration. It's in between these 2. So, how to turn conflicts into an agreement. There are 3 parts. How many of you have ever noticed this emotional wave hits you in the middle of an argument that causes you to forget any communication skill? How many of you have ever said something you wish you hadn't? Too late when you said it. Why? Because this emotional upset hit us too quick. Then there's one thing you need to know that can eliminate the majority of conflict in your life. I'll show you how to do that. And then there's some communication skills. I'm going to give you links to learn more later because I've only got a few minutes. So the first is how to speed through stress in 5 steps in 15 seconds. The trick is to learn how just to breathe. Everybody take a deep breath and relax and reassure yourself you're okay. Think positive. It's hard to jump from a negative thought to a positive thought without doing the breathing and relaxing. That's kind of a shoehorn into thinking more positive. And then looking for some humor, because it's often there in surprising ways. And the better you are at this, at the stoplight, in the grocery store line, when the computer crashes, the better you'll be in the moment when in a relationship there's tension and conflict. Now, I assume you're already thinking that this could be applicable in personal relationships as well. All the same stuff. So what's that one thing? The one thing that I think causes the majority of conflict. Let's just see what you think. What percent of conflict, disagreements, arguments do you have you think might be because of a misunderstanding? Just get a number in your mind. No correct answer. Just whatever you think. How many of you think 50% or more? Anybody? Anybody think 75% or more? Anybody think 90% or more? Justice Brandeis of the Supreme Court agrees with you. He thinks it's 90%. So let's just look at that, the conflict that is in fact because of a misunderstanding. Now, what percent of that, percent of conflict that is because of a misunderstanding, what percent of that is because you misunderstand? How many of you are thinking of a smaller number? So you're willing to take some responsibility, but think about it. In the middle of an argument, what do you believe about your point of view? Right. What percent of the time? 100% of the time. You always think you're right. That's what I'm telling you. You always think you're right. Is there anyone here who does not know you always think you're right? Okay, so sometimes you think you're wrong. Okay, so isn't it true when you think you're wrong that you think you're right that you're wrong? I got you. No matter what we think we're right about it or we wouldn't be thinking it. And the problem is, in conflict, as soon as someone says something we disagree with, we are compelled to point it out. And our timing is off. Now, I mean, for instance, so when you know you're right, what do you know about them? They're wrong. And when you know you're right and you know they're wrong, what's your job? To correct them. Just trying to be helpful. Just don't want them to go down the wrong path. Now, what percent of the time when we know we're right and we know they're wrong and we try to point it out, try to correct them, try to help them, what percent of the time are they grateful? Never. But what percent of the time do we do it? All the time. Let that sink in. Here's something we all do automatically, unconsciously, never works, doesn't matter, we're right. There's a lady named Betty Rogers who died in Coral Gables, Florida years ago, and she had inscribed on her tombstone, "See, I told you I was sick." She died to make a point. So we will destroy relationships to make a point, to prove we're right and they're wrong. And it happens at work as well. So here's some things to do, some communication skills to know. 3 questions to end conflict. 5 levels of clear communication. Facts, thoughts, opinions, importance, expectations. And 6 stages in reaching agreement. I've got a little 3-minute video of something I'm going to show you in a few minutes on that page, along with a lot of handouts. So speedthroughstress.com, successfulworkrelationship.com are both powerful things. So first, the 3 questions to end conflict. So here I've got my little props here. So here's you, and what do you believe about your ideas? What percent? 100%. And here is them, and they're all full of, be nice. Their ideas, what do they think about theirs? Okay, so you're trying to get your ideas into them, and they're trying to get their ideas into you. This is called an argument. And how many of you are thinking about me getting water on the floor? How can he do that? So what's in the way of you getting your ideas into them? They're all full of their ideas. Just saying your ideas louder, how often has that worked? How often do they go, "Oh, thank you for pointing that out. I don't know what got into me. I don't know why I was thinking that." Never, ever. The problem is when we come right back with our ideas, what we do is we force them to become defensive of the idea we want them to let go of. They hold on to it tighter because you don't understand. And even if what you have to offer is right, I mean, it would save their life. If they don't experience being understood by you, they make a decision, nothing you say has any relevance. So I learned, the first thing I got to do is have them tell me that I understand. Not me tell them. That doesn't work. So how did I get that to happen? Well, I take my ideas, which are what kind? The right, exactly. And I put them aside, and I create an empty place in me. Just like when you create a new folder in your computer, there's space in there. It's not true what my dad says. He says whenever he has to remember something, he has to decide on something to forget so he has some room. That's not true. So here is the questions. First question. What is it you want me to know? I mean, how many of you ever had experience in the middle of an argument with a parent and had them go, "Wow, I can tell this is important to you. What is it that you want me to know?" Not too much. But when someone is full of their ideas and someone says, basically, "Tell me," what are they going to do? They're going to start telling you. Now notice the action that happens. Well, there's this and this and this. Ooh, they emptied themselves out a little bit. Now be careful, because you're going to have a lot of opinions about their this and this and this, and you're going to really feel like you need to say it. Don't. Hold it back there. Take what they gave you and just give it back. Oh, so there's this and this and this? And if you do it well, they'll go, yeah! And it's like they really, you understood. Now you'll think it's your turn, and it's not. What are the chances there's something else in here? Pretty good. So the second question, is there anything else? Well, there's that and that. Oh, there's that and that, and this and this and this? Yes! And now you feel like, boy, you really do good, which you are. You probably done more than most people in that person's life to listen. And you'll really think it's your turn. And it's not. Because there's the third question. Is that all? What's the chances there's a little bit more? And it's real fascinating. When you get to this place and you ask the question, is that all? They often all say the same thing. They'll say, well, because you asked, which means you weren't going to get it. But because you've demonstrated interest, concern, caring, cooperation, collaboration, they're now going to risk telling you, well, there's this. Oh, this. Yes, this. How many times is the last this what it was all about? But you wouldn't get to it if you didn't go to this and this and that and that and that and get down there. Now, at this point, I need to ask them a question. The question is, am I understanding? I don't want them just to tell me that I understand. I want them to tell themselves that I understand. Because until that happens, there's no openness in the other person to hear anything. So it requires some patience. Breathe, relax, reassure yourself, it'll work out. Even look for some humor. Now, I've been talking mainly about a leader and employees, etc. But sometimes we have to have conflict between organizations, and that's a challenge. And so when we've worked with like sales and ops and they have difficulty, we do this really neat thing. We have each come up with a list of what they would like the other to agree to. Ooh. They are great at making that list. Then we ask them, so make a second list. What's on their first list? I hadn't thought about that. And then we start with the second list, and we get rid of all the misunderstandings. Because if I tell you something you want me to know before you tell me, how could you say I don't understand? If you tell me and then I tell you, well, I just repeated what you said. So this eliminates a lot of misunderstanding. We get down to what the real thing is. But sometimes that's not enough. Maybe there's just reasons why we can't ever reach an agreement. So then we need to bump it up to a higher authority. By this question, what would it take for me to do what they want? That's the key to working out a negotiation. What would it take for me to do what they want? Write that on your hand. You're going to need it soon. But bumping it up. So normally, remember how many of you have brothers and sisters? Did any of you have a brother or sister who went and complained about you to your parent? You didn't do that. I know you didn't. So at work, people do that too. And it makes it difficult for the leader. So here's what we recommend people do. They both go together, and one describes the other's point of view to that person's satisfaction. Seems so obvious. And then they describe that person's point of view to their satisfaction. And then we clarify, where we agree, where what I want is they can't agree to, what they want I can't agree to. And so we need you to make a decision. It's so clean. It's so easy. We just don't ever get there. And yet it could be. Mastering these things is really important. It's really what corporations, government, associations, education, religious organizations are looking for. They're looking for leaders who can do this. And now you know. So you could be one of those they're looking for. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you today.